My child gave away his deaf newborn, so I spent years mastering sign language to find her someday. Eventually, the baby arrived just before sunrise, when the hallway lights were still dim and the air smelled like clean sheets and strong coffee. Nurses moved softly, speaking in low voices, as if the day itself had not fully woken yet. The grandmother stood near the door, hands folded, heart beating fast. She had waited through the long night, through the quiet beeps and the tired smiles, through the fear that always comes when a life begins. When the cry finally came, sharp and bright, her chest filled with relief. A new life had entered the world, small and warm, and everything felt possible. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. When they placed the baby in her arms, the grandmother felt a calm she had not known in years. The baby's skin was soft, the tiny fingers curled and uncurling like they were testing the world. The grandmother whispered promises without words, the kind that live only in the heart. She felt an instant love, deep and sure, like something old had come back to her. She thought of mornings, of first steps, of stories told before sleep. She did not think of fear. She did not think of limits. She only thought of love. The mother rested nearby, tired but peaceful, her eyes closing and opening as she drifted between sleep and wake. The father stood stiff at the foot of the bed. He smiled when others looked at him, but his smile did not reach his eyes. He watched the baby with a look that was hard to read, a mix of wonder and worry. The grandmother noticed it but said nothing. She believed joy would come in time. It always did, she told herself. Later that morning, the doctors came back. Their faces were kind but careful. They asked to speak in private. The grandmother felt the shift in the room, the air growing heavy. She followed them to a small office with pale walls and a desk too clean to feel friendly. The doctors spoke slowly, choosing their words like stepping stones. They explained the tests. They explained the results. The baby could not hear. The loss was complete and permanent. For a moment, the grandmother did not understand. The words sounded strange, like a language she had never learned. Deaf. No hearing. Permanent. She asked if there had been a mistake. The doctor shook his head gently. He talked about early support, about sign language, about devices that could help in other ways. He talked about full lives and strong communities. He spoke with care and hope. The grandmother nodded. She felt a wave of sadness, yes, but it did not drown her. She thought of the baby's warm weight, the way the fingers held on. She thought of eyes that would learn to read faces, hands that would learn to speak. She felt grief for what would be different, but her love did not change. If anything, it grew stronger, more protective. The father did not react the same way. When he heard the news, his face was drained of color. He asked the same questions again and again, as if repeating them might change the answers. He stared at the floor. He paced. He rubbed his hands together until the skin turned red. The grandmother reached out to him, but he pulled away. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words came out sharp and fast. He asked how they would manage. He asked what people would say. He asked if the baby would ever be normal. The grandmother felt a sting at that word. She told him there were many ways to be normal. She told him the baby was perfect as she was. She told him love would find a way. But fear had already taken hold of him. He spoke of work and money, of long days and tired nights. He spoke of schools he did not understand and a future he could not picture. He spoke of being judged, of being pitied, of being blamed. Each worry piled on the next until he seemed buried under them. The mother listened quietly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She was exhausted, her body still shaking from birth. She loved her baby, but fear touched her too. She worried about being strong enough. She worried about doing something wrong. She looked to the father for guidance, hoping he would calm down. Instead, his fear grew louder. The grandmother tried to steady the room. She spoke of patience. She spoke of learning together. She offered help, time, money, anything she had. She reminded them they were not alone. She reminded them that this child was theirs, that love did not depend on sound. The father shook his head. He said love was not enough. He said the world was hard, and it would be harder for this child. He said it would be kinder to give the baby a chance with people who were prepared, people who knew what they were doing. The word adoption slipped into the room like a cold wind. The grandmother felt her breath leave her body. She stared at him, waiting for him to take it back. She thought it was fear speaking, that time would soften him. She told him adoption was not kindness when love was present. She told him families learn. She told him running away would not erase the truth. The mother looked torn. She held the baby close, then loosened her grip, then held her again. Her eyes moved between the father and the grandmother. She whispered that maybe they should think about it. Just think. The grandmother felt panic rise, sharp and sudden. She begged them to slow down. She asked for days, for weeks. She asked them to take the baby home and let love settle. She promised to be there every step. She promised to learn signs, to attend meetings, to help at night. She promised the baby would never be alone. The father would not wait. He said the decision had to be made now, before attachments grew deeper. He said it would be easier this way. Easier, he repeated, as if the word could carry the weight of what he meant. Behind closed doors, paperwork began to move. The grandmother was not invited. Forms were signed in quiet rooms. Calls were made. Arrangements were discussed in low voices. The grandmother sat in the waiting area, hands shaking, watching doors open and close. Every minute felt like a small loss. When she was finally told, it was done. The baby would be placed with a family experienced in caring for deaf children. The words sounded kind and reasonable. They sounded final. The grandmother felt her knees weaken. She asked if she could take the baby herself. She asked if the family could step in. The answer was no. The parents had decided. She went back to the room one last time. The baby slept, peaceful and unaware. The grandmother touched the tiny cheek, memorizing the warmth. She whispered promises she could not keep. She told the baby she was loved, that she mattered, that none of this was her fault. Tears fell, silent and heavy. The father stood by the window, staring out. The mother looked away, unable to meet the grandmother's eyes. No one spoke. There were no words left that could change anything. When the baby was carried away, the grandmother felt something break inside her. It was not loud. It was a quiet, deep crack, the kind that changes the shape of a person. She walked out of the hospital into bright daylight that felt wrong. People laughed, cars passed, life went on. The world had not stopped, even though hers had. In the days that followed, the grandmother moved through her routines like a shadow. She cooked and cleaned and answered calls she did not want to take. Friends tried to comfort her with careful phrases. She nodded and thanked them. At night, she lay awake, seeing the baby's face in the dark. She felt powerless in a way she never had before. She had raised her child with care. She had believed love would guide him. Now she questioned every step, every lesson. She wondered where she had failed, what fear she had passed on without knowing. Still, beneath the grief, her love did not fade. It settled into a quiet resolve. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing clearly. That baby existed. That baby was part of her. And no decision, no signature, could erase that truth. The grandmother was standing at her window at dusk, watching the light fade, holding on to the hope that somehow, someday, love would find its way back to the child who had changed her forever. The days after the adoption did not explode into arguments or loud fights. They broke apart slowly, quietly, like something cracking under the surface where no one could see it. The house stayed standing. Meals were still cooked. Words were still spoken. But something important was missing, and everyone felt it, even when they pretended not to. The son returned to his routine as if nothing had changed. He went to work. He paid bills. He talked about plans and schedules. When the subject of the baby came close, he shut it down fast. He used the same sentence every time, said in a flat voice, as if reading from a script. It was for the best. He said it calmly, firmly, like the matter was closed. The grandmother heard those words again, and each time they felt heavier. For the best. Best for who, she wondered. She wanted to ask, but she already knew the answer he would give. Best for the baby, he would say. Best for everyone. He never said best for himself, but she could hear it between the lines. She tried once, just once, to speak more openly. They were sitting at the table, the space between them filled with untouched food. She asked if he ever thought about the baby. He stiffened. His jaw tightened. He said there was no point in reopening wounds. He said dwelling on it would only cause pain. Then he stood up and left the room. After that, she stayed quiet. The silence spread through the family like fog. The mother rarely visited. When she did, her eyes looked tired, her smiles forced. She avoided the grandmother's gaze, as if afraid of what she might see there. Sometimes she spoke about small things, about errands or weather, but she never spoke about the baby. The grandmother sensed deep regret in her, but also fear. Fear of admitting what could not be undone. The grandmother's own days became strangely empty. There was no crib to pass, no toys to pick up, no tiny clothes folded in drawers. Yet the baby was everywhere. In the quiet mornings. In the empty afternoons. In the evenings when the sun fell just right and reminded her of the hospital window. She replayed that day over and over in her mind. Every word. Every pause. Every moment she hesitated. She asked herself the same questions until they had no answers left. Why didn't I shout louder? Why didn't I refuse to leave the room? Why didn't I demand custody? Why did I believe reason would win over fear? Guilt settled into her like a weight she could not put down. She had protected her child all his life. She had fought for him, guided him, forgiven him. But when her grandchild needed her most, she felt she had failed. That thought cut deeper than anything else. At night, sleep came in short pieces. She dreamed of holding the baby, only to wake with empty arms. She dreamed of doors closing, of papers sliding across tables, of hands pulling the baby away. Sometimes she woke with tears already falling, unsure when they had started. There was no place for her grief. No funeral. No visits. No updates. The baby was alive somewhere, breathing, growing, changing, but unreachable. It felt like mourning someone who still existed. A loss without a body. A wound without a name. Friends noticed the change in her. They asked gentle questions. She gave careful answers. She said the baby had been adopted. She said it was complicated. She said everyone was doing their best. These words tasted false, but they were easier than the truth. At family gatherings, the absence was loud. Conversations skipped over certain months. Photos were not shown. Stories were not told. When someone asked how the young couple was doing, the grandmother smiled and nodded, even as something twisted inside her. The son stayed distant. He visited less. When he did come, he kept conversations shallow. He avoided sitting too long. He avoided silence most of all. Silence might invite questions, and questions might invite regret. Sometimes the grandmother caught him staring off into space, his face tight, his hands clenched. In those moments, she saw cracks in his certainty. She saw fear trying to turn into denial. She wondered if he felt the weight too, or if he had buried it deeper than she ever could. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to tell him that doing what felt easy was not the same as doing what was right. She wanted to ask how he would live with this years from now. But she stayed quiet. Not because she agreed, but because she feared losing him too. The house itself seemed to change. Rooms felt larger, emptier. Sounds echoed more. She found herself talking out loud sometimes, just to break the stillness. Other times, She sat for hours without moving, lost in thought. She began to notice small things she had missed before. Babies in strollers. Small hands holding grown ones. Laughter without sound, mouths open in joy. She wondered if the baby would laugh that way. She wondered who would notice first. One afternoon, she opened a drawer and found the small blanket she had bought before the birth. She had forgotten it was there. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. She pressed it to her face, breathing in a scent that was already fading. She cried then, deeply and freely, for the first time since the adoption. Anger followed the grief. Not loud anger, but a steady burn. Anger at fear. Anger at pride. Anger at a system that moved faster than love. Anger at herself for believing she had more time. She thought often about the word best. She turned it over in her mind, testing its meaning. Best did not feel kind. Best did not feel loving. Best felt like an excuse to run from something hard. Still, beneath the anger and guilt, regret lived quietly. Regret for every moment she chose peace over conflict. Regret for trusting that others would see what she saw. Regret for not fighting harder, even if it meant breaking everything. The baby became a silent presence in her life. She spoke of her rarely, and only in private. Sometimes she whispered good night into the dark. Sometimes she imagined the baby growing, learning, finding her own ways to communicate with the world. These thoughts brought both comfort and pain. There were days when the grandmother felt almost normal. She laughed at a joke. She enjoyed a meal. Then, without warning, the grief returned, sharp and sudden, like a wave crashing over her chest. She learned to live with it, but never to escape it. As time passed, the family learned how to exist with the unspoken. They avoided the truth. Carefully, like walking around broken glass. The grandmother knew this silence was another kind of betrayal, one that continued every day. Yet even in silence, love did not disappear. It changed shape. It became quieter, heavier, more patient. She did not know if she would ever see her grandchild again. She did not know if forgiveness was possible. What she did know was this. The decision that had been made in fear had left marks on everyone. And no matter how often the son said it was for the best, regret lived in the spaces he refused to look at. The grandmother was sitting alone in the evening, holding the small blanket in her hands, listening to the quiet, carrying a love that had nowhere to go. Time moved forward, even though the grandmother felt stuck in the same place. Days passed, seasons changed, and the world continued with its usual noise. Yet inside her, everything stayed quiet and heavy. She carried the loss with her wherever she went, like a shadow that never left. One evening, after another long day that felt empty for no clear reason, she sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. No television. No radio. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock. She stared at her hands resting on the table, older hands, hands that had held children, cooked meals, wiped tears. A thought came to her slowly, not loud or sudden. It did not arrive like a decision. It arrived like a truth that had been waiting. I will find her. She did not say it out loud. The words felt too fragile for sound. She kept them inside, close to her chest. She did not know how or when. She did not know if it was even possible. But the promise settled in her heart, calm and steady. One day, she told herself. One day, I will find my granddaughter. From that moment on, something changed. The grief did not disappear, but it shifted. It stopped being only pain and became something else too. It became direction. She began to think about the child more clearly. Not just as a baby she had lost, but as a person growing somewhere else. A child learning the world in her own way. A child who would not hear lullabies or spoken stories, but who would see faces, hands, movement, and expression. The grandmother realized something she had not allowed herself to face before. If she ever found her granddaughter, words would not be enough. Spoken language would not reach her. She would need hands. The thought scared her at first. She knew nothing about sign language. She worried she was too old to learn something new. She worried she would embarrass herself, that her fingers would not listen, that her memory would fail. But the promise was stronger than the fear. She did not tell anyone. Not her son. Not friends. Not family. This promise was hers alone. It felt private, almost sacred, like a quiet conversation between her and the child who was far away. She started small. One afternoon at the library, she wandered into a section she had never visited before. She ran her fingers along the spines of books until one title made her stop. It was a simple guide to sign language, worn at the edges, clearly used many times before. Her hands shook as she took it off the shelf. At home, she opened the book slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. The pages showed pictures of hands in different shapes, arrows showing movement, faces showing emotion. It looked confusing. Overwhelming. She closed the book once, took a breath, then opened it again. She started with the first page. The first sign she learned was simple. It felt awkward. Her fingers did not bend the way the picture showed. She practiced in front of the mirror, feeling silly, feeling clumsy. She laughed once, a short sound, then wiped her eyes. This is for her, she reminded herself. She practiced every evening after dinner. Just a few minutes at first. She locked the door, closed the curtains, and stood in front of the mirror. Her movements were slow. Sometimes she got frustrated and shut the book too hard. Sometimes she whispered apologies to the empty room. Her hands were not young anymore. They were stiff in the mornings, slow to warm up. But they remembered more than she expected. Day by day, sign by sign, something began to stick. She learned how to say hello. She learned how to say love. That one made her stop. When she formed the sign for love, her chest tightened. She held the position longer than needed, staring at her reflection. The movement felt simple, but the meaning felt huge. She imagined using it one day, her hands speaking what her voice could not. As weeks passed, learning became part of her routine. It was no longer just something she did out of pain. It became something she looked forward to. The quiet practice gave her peace. It gave her something solid to hold on to. She began to notice hands everywhere. On buses. In shops. On television. She watched people more closely now, noticing expressions, eye contact, body language. She realized how much communication happened without sound. Sometimes she practiced signs while waiting in line, her hands moving small and hidden near her sides. Sometimes she traced signs in the air while lying in bed, eyes closed, memorizing the feeling rather than the shape. There were days she wanted to give up. Days when her fingers felt stiff and her mind felt tired. Days when the distance between her and her granddaughter felt too wide to cross. On those days, she reminded herself that bridges were not built all at once. Each sign learned felt like a small piece of wood laid across a gap. One piece alone could not carry weight. But many pieces together could. She began to imagine moments she had never allowed herself to picture before. Standing face to face with the child. Seeing curiosity in her eyes. Lifting her hands and being understood. These thoughts no longer hurt the way they once had. They still carried sadness, but also warmth. The grandmother kept her learning secret. When her son visited, she hid the books away. When friends came over, she changed the subject if anything came close. She was afraid of questions she could not answer. Mostly, she was afraid of being told to let go. But she could not let go. Not anymore. Learning sign language changed her in quiet ways. She became more patient. More observant. She listened with her eyes. She slowed down. She also began to forgive herself. Just a little. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to keep going. She understood now that protecting her granddaughter did not end with that one moment she failed. Love was not a single act. It was something that continued, even across distance and time. Months passed. Her hands grew more confident. Her movements smoother. She could string signs together now, forming simple sentences. She practiced introducing herself, even though no one was there. She practiced saying, "I have been waiting for you." That one always made her cry. Still, she kept going. The promise she had made in private stayed alive through every doubt and delay. It did not rush her. It did not demand results. It simply asked her to continue. One night, after finishing her practice, she sat by the window and watched the lights outside flicker on. She held her hands in her lap, feeling the ache in her fingers, the good kind of ache. Somewhere, her granddaughter was growing, learning, becoming herself. And here, quietly, patiently, the grandmother was preparing. Her turning off the light, pressing her hands together for a moment, and holding on to the promise that one day, those hands would finally be understood. Years passed, not loudly, but steadily. They arrived one after another, carrying birthdays, seasons, and quiet changes that were easy to miss if no one was paying attention. The grandmother noticed them all. She felt each year settle into her bones, felt time mark her body in small ways. Yet her purpose did not weaken. If anything, it became more certain. She kept learning. What had once been secret practice in her living room slowly turned into something more serious. One morning, after much thought, she signed up for a class. Walking into that room for the first time, she felt the same nervousness she had felt years ago when she first opened the book at the library. The room was bright and full of movement. Hands spoke everywhere. Faces shifted with emotion. The air felt alive, even though there was little sound. She stood near the door for a moment, unsure, feeling older than everyone else. Then someone smiled at her and waved. That simple gesture loosened something inside her. The classes were not easy. Her fingers still moved slower than she wanted. Her memory sometimes failed her. She practiced more than anyone else, repeating signs until her hands ached. At night, she soaked them in warm water and smiled at the soreness. It reminded her she was still moving forward. She practiced with strangers. Young people. Older people. Parents. Children. Each conversation felt like another step across the bridge she had been building for years. Sometimes she made mistakes and laughed at herself. Sometimes she misunderstood and felt embarrassed. But she never stopped. She learned that sign language was not just about hands. It was about timing, expression, respect. It was about seeing people fully. The more she learned, the more she watched. She watched children sign fluently, their hands moving fast and sure. She watched the way they teased each other, argued, laughed. She watched parents sign stories, teachers sign lessons, friends sign secrets. Every child she saw made her heart pause. She wondered if her granddaughter was among them. She wondered if she was tall or small, shy or bold. She wondered what made her smile, what frustrated her, what dreams she carried. Sometimes she imagined recognizing her instantly. Other times she feared she would pass right by without knowing. That fear never stopped her. It only made her pay closer attention. Outside of this quiet mission, life continued in other ways. Her son moved forward. He built a life that looked clean and orderly from the outside. New routines. New plans. New reasons to be busy. He spoke less and less about the past. When the topic came close, he brushed it aside with practiced ease. He said the right things. He said he hoped the child was happy. He said he trusted the choice they had made. His voice carried confidence, but the grandmother noticed how quickly he changed the subject. She did not challenge him. Not anymore. She understood now that everyone survived in their own way. His was by distance. Hers was by devotion. She carried her mission alone. Friends sometimes asked why she spent so much time learning sign language. She gave gentle answers. She said she enjoyed it. She said it kept her mind active. She never spoke of the promise. That promise lived quietly inside her, unchanged. As the years went on, Her hair turned lighter. Her steps slowed slightly. But her hands stayed strong. They moved with confidence now, shaping thoughts with ease. She could follow fast conversations. She could tell stories. She could listen with her eyes without feeling lost. She volunteered when she could. She helped at events. She offered support without asking for anything in return. These moments filled her with calm. They reminded her that even waiting had value. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when doubt crept in. When she wondered if she was chasing something that would never happen. When she asked herself if hope was kind or cruel. On those days, she reminded herself why she had started. Not to undo the past. Not to force a reunion. But to be ready. If the day ever came. She watched the calendar carefully but quietly. She noted ages in her mind. She counted years without marking them out loud. Each birthday that passed somewhere else carried both sadness and pride. She wondered if her granddaughter knew she had been loved from the very beginning. At night, she sometimes sat with her hands resting in her lap, replaying signs in her mind. Simple sentences. Gentle words. Things she might say one day. I am here. You are not alone. I never stopped loving you. She practiced those the most. Her son rarely noticed these changes. When he visited, he saw his mother as she had always been. Kind. Quiet. Stable. He did not see the work behind her calm. He did not see the years layered inside her silence. And she did not show him. She had learned that some promises were not meant to be explained. The waiting became part of who she was. Not a pause, but a path. Each year added weight to it, but also meaning. She was no longer waiting in pain. She was waiting with purpose. One afternoon, while sitting in a park, she watched a group of children singing together. Their laughter showed in their faces, bright and free. Her heart tightened, then softened. She smiled. Somewhere, her granddaughter was living her life. And here, the grandmother was ready. With her walking home slowly as the sun set, hands relaxed at her sides, carrying years of patience, love, and waiting. Still silent, still steady, still unbroken. The decision to search did not come with relief. It came with weight. For years, the grandmother had prepared in quiet ways. She had learned. She had waited. She had held her promise gently, afraid that touching it too hard might break it. But one morning, as she sat at the table with sunlight falling across her hands, she understood something clearly. Waiting was no longer enough. She did not announce her decision. She did not mark the day. She simply began. She gathered what little she had. Old papers tucked into folders. Dates written in careful handwriting. A hospital name. A few official words that said almost nothing at all. The adoption records were thin, guarded, and old. Many doors were closed by law, others by time. Still she tried. She wrote letters first. Careful ones. Polite ones. She rewrote them many times before sending them, worrying over every sentence. She did not want to sound demanding. She did not want to sound desperate. She wanted to sound respectful, even when her heart was shaking. Weeks passed. No answers came. She made phone calls next. Some were short. Some were transferred again and again until the line went quiet. Some ended with gentle apologies and firm refusals. Records were sealed. Information could not be shared. Policies had changed. Each call left her tired. Each letter returned unanswered felt heavier than the last. She learned quickly that searching was not a straight path. It twisted. It stopped. It doubled back on itself. One small lead would appear, only to disappear days later. A name that led nowhere. A date that did not match. A file that could not be found. At night, doubt crept in. She sat at the edge of her bed and asked herself questions she had avoided for years. What if I waited too long? What if she does not want to be found? What if my presence only brings confusion or pain? The hardest question of all came quietly. Do I even have the right? The grandmother thought about the child she had held only once. She thought about the decision that had taken her away. She wondered if love alone was enough to justify reopening a life that had grown without her. Some mornings, she almost stopped. On those days, she returned to her hands. She practiced signs slowly, carefully, as she had done for years. The movements steadied her. They reminded her why she was searching in the first place. Not to claim. Not to disrupt. But to connect. She told herself she would accept whatever outcome came. If the child said no, she would step back. If the door stayed closed, she would carry the love quietly, as she always had. But she had to try. The search took more from her than she expected. Emotionally, she felt raw. Each step forward stirred memories she had learned to live with. Each delay reopened old wounds. There were days when she felt foolish, chasing shadows with tired hands. Days when the silence felt louder than ever. Yet there were also moments of unexpected kindness. A clerk who paused longer than required. A worker who suggested one more place to check. A stranger who looked at her with understanding and did not rush her away. These moments mattered. They reminded her she was not wrong to hope. She began keeping a small notebook. She wrote down dates, names, numbers, and thoughts. Some pages were filled with neat notes. Others held only a few words written shakily after a hard day. One entry read simply, "Still trying." Her son remained unaware. She did not tell him what she was doing. The distance between them had grown quiet and steady over the years. She sensed that telling him now would only invite resistance, questions she was too tired to answer. This search was hers. She moved carefully, respecting boundaries even when they hurt. She never pushed past a clear no. She never pretended to be something she was not. She identified herself honestly, even when it closed doors. Sometimes, late at night, she imagined what it might be like if she succeeded. She imagined writing a letter that would actually reach the right hands. She imagined waiting for a response that might never come. She imagined the child, now grown into someone with opinions, memories, and a life shaped by choices she had not witnessed. Would she be angry? Would she be curious? Would she see the grandmother as a stranger? These thoughts frightened her, but they did not stop her. She reminded herself that finding someone did not mean forcing closeness. It meant offering truth and leaving the rest to time. The process was slow. Months passed with little change. Some leads closed quietly. Others led to more waiting. There were days when she set everything aside and went for long walks, letting her thoughts settle. She watched people pass, wondered about the lives behind their faces. She thought about how many stories crossed paths without ever touching. One afternoon, she sat at a desk with a stack of papers spread out before her. Her hands rested on top of them, still and tired. For the first time since beginning the search, tears came without warning. She cried for the baby she had lost. She cried for the years she had missed. She cried for the possibility that this search might end without answers. When the tears passed, she took a deep breath and gathered the papers again. She was not finished. The doubt never fully left her, but it changed. It stopped asking her to quit and started asking her to be gentle with herself. She learned to rest when she needed to pause without giving up. One evening, as she practiced signs by the window, she realized something important. No matter how the search ended, the work she had done mattered. The love she carried mattered. She had become someone who listened deeply. Someone who waited with patience. Someone who believed that connection was worth the risk. The search was not just about finding her granddaughter. It was about honoring the promise she had made long ago in silence. As she turned off the light that night, she placed her hands together for a moment, feeling the familiar strength in them. Somewhere, answers existed. Somewhere, a life touched hers without knowing it. And here, the grandmother continued forward, uncertain, tired, hopeful, and brave enough to keep going. Not with resolution, but with movement, the quiet courage of a woman choosing to search, even when the outcome remains unknown. The breakthrough did not arrive with excitement or noise. It came quietly, like most things that mattered. The grandmother was sitting at her table, sorting through papers she knew almost by heart, when the phone rang. She almost let it go unanswered. Many calls had led nowhere before. But something made her pick it up. The voice on the other end was careful and calm. The woman spoke slowly, as if aware of how much weight her words carried. She explained that certain records had changed status, that a connection had been made, that some information could now be shared. The grandmother listened without interrupting. Her hands rested flat on the table. Her breathing stayed steady, though her chest felt tight. A name was spoken. Then a city. Then an age. Each detail landed softly, yet changed everything. When the call ended, the grandmother did not move for a long time. She sat there, eyes fixed on the wall, letting the truth settle into her body. After all the waiting, all the doubt, the child was no longer only a thought. She was real. She had a name. She lived in a place that could be reached. The next steps were careful ones. There were forms to complete, permissions to respect, boundaries clearly explained. The grandmother agreed to everything without hesitation. She understood that this meeting was not about her needs. It was about the child's comfort. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, a date was set. On the morning of the meeting, the grandmother woke before sunrise. She dressed slowly, choosing clothes that felt familiar and calm. She practiced a few signs while standing by the window, not because she was unsure, but because it steadied her. Her hands did not shake. The place was simple. A quiet room with chairs placed in a circle. Soft light. Nothing that felt rushed or overwhelming. When the grandmother walked in, she noticed the small details first. A table in the corner. A plant near the window. The sound of her own footsteps. Then she saw the girl. She was smaller than the grandmother had imagined, but not fragile. She sat close to the adult beside her, watching carefully. Her eyes were alert, thoughtful, curious, but guarded. The grandmother stopped a few steps away. She did not rush forward. She did not reach out. She waited. The girl studied her openly, her gaze moving from the grandmother's face to her hands. The grandmother felt her heart press against her ribs, but she stayed still. When the time felt right, she lifted her hands. Her movements were slow and gentle. She signed a greeting, simple and clear. Not as a test. Not to impress anyone. Just as an offering. The girl's eyes widened slightly. The grandmother continued. She signed who she was, in the simplest way she knew how. She signed that she was happy to meet her. She signed that she had learned this language because it mattered to her. The room stayed quiet. The girl did not respond right away. She watched closely, her face unreadable. Then she looked at the adult beside her, then back at the grandmother. Carefully, she signed a small response. The grandmother felt something release inside her. They did not speak of the past. Not yet. There were no explanations, no heavy truths placed on the table. The moment did not need them. The grandmother signed simple things. That she liked the girl's shoes. That the room was quiet. That she was glad to be there. The girl's answers were short, cautious. But she stayed. That felt like everything. The grandmother noticed how the girl's hands moved with ease, how her expressions shifted quickly, how alive her face was. She noticed the strength there. The confidence that came from being understood. At one point, the grandmother signed something wrong. Her hand shape slipped. She stopped, corrected herself, and smiled. The girl smiled back. It was a small moment. It was enough. When the meeting ended, the grandmother did not ask for promises. She did not ask for more than what was offered. She thanked everyone with her hands, steady and respectful. As she stood to leave, the girl looked at her again, longer this time. Her expression was thoughtful, not afraid. The grandmother signed one last thing. "I am here." The girl did not answer, but she watched closely, as if memorizing the movement. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. The grandmother walked slowly, letting the moment replay in her mind. The girl's face, the careful curiosity, the way her hands had responded. Nothing was finished. Nothing was certain. But something had begun. Years of waiting had led to this quiet room, this shared language, this proof of love shaped not by sound, but by effort. The grandmother did not know what the future would bring. She did not know what place she would have in the girl's life. She only knew this. Love, spoken with patience and respect, had finally been understood. With the grandmother walking away with calm steps, her hands relaxed, carrying the knowledge that when the moment came, she had spoken the right language. Trust did not arrive all at once. It grew slowly, in careful pieces, shaped by time and consistency. After the first meeting, there were others. Short ones at first. Quiet ones. Always with clear boundaries. Always at the girl's pace. The grandmother never pushed. She listened more than she spoke. She showed up when invited and stepped back when needed. Each visit added something small but important. Familiarity. Comfort. Safety. The girl began to relax in her presence. Her questions became more frequent. Her eyes lingered longer. Sometimes she shared stories about school, about friends, about small moments that mattered to her. The grandmother treasured these moments, but she knew a larger truth waited beneath them. One afternoon, during a calm visit, the girl asked a question without warning. Why did I live somewhere else? The question was signed clearly, without anger, but with seriousness. The grandmother felt the weight of it settle into her chest. This was the moment she had both feared and prepared for. She did not answer right away. She took a breath. She reminded herself that honesty did not mean cruelty. She signed slowly, choosing her words with care. She told the girl that adults sometimes make decisions from fear instead of understanding. She explained that when the girl was born, her father was young in his thinking, overwhelmed by things he did not yet know how to face. She paused often, watching the girl's face. She made one thing very clear. It was never because you were unlovable. The girl watched closely, her expression tightening, then softening. She asked more questions. Harder ones. Did he not want me? Was something wrong with me? The grandmother felt tears rise, but she did not let them rush her. She signed firmly, with certainty. There was nothing wrong with you. She explained that fear can make people run from responsibility. That some people confuse difficulty with failure. That love does not always look brave when it is mixed with shame. The girl listened in silence. When she finally looked away, her shoulders dropped slightly, as if something heavy had been set down. The truth hurts. That much was clear. But it did not break her. Later that evening, the grandmother sat alone and let the emotions she had held back finally surface. Anger came first. Sharp and hot. Anger at her son for choosing fear over growth. Anger for the years that had been lost. She signed angrily to herself in the quiet room, hands moving fast, words spilling out without sound. Then came understanding. She remembered her son as a younger man. Proud. Insecure. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of failing in ways he did not know how to name. She saw now that he had not been cruel on purpose. He had been small in his thinking. That knowledge did not erase the harm, but it softened the edges. Forgiveness did not arrive in a single moment. It did not feel clean or easy. It came slowly, mixed with sadness and disappointment. It came with conditions. Forgiveness did not mean excusing the choice. It meant acknowledging the truth. The grandmother also faced her own pain honestly. She admitted quietly that she had not fought as hard as she could have. That she had chosen peace when conflict was needed. That regret still lived with her. Naming these truths hurts. But it also freed her. In the weeks that followed, the girl asked fewer questions about the past and more about the present. She wanted to know why the grandmother had learned her language. Why did she wait so long? The grandmother answered with simplicity. Because you mattered. Because I wanted to speak to you. The girl nodded, absorbing this not just as information, but as feeling. Trust deepened. Healing did not erase the pain, but it changed its shape. It became something they could carry together, instead of alone. The grandmother knew that one day, the girl might want to meet her father. Or she might not. That choice would belong to her. For now, honesty had opened a door. Not to forget, but to understand. With the grandmother and the girl sitting side by side, hands resting calmly, sharing a quiet understanding that truth, though painful, had made space for something new to grow. The days that followed were not filled with big moments. They were made of small ones. Shared looks. Simple conversations. Quiet time spent side by side without the need to explain anything. The grandmother and the girl did not rush what was growing between them. They let it move at its own pace. Some visits were full of questions and stories. Others were calm and gentle, marked by long pauses and easy silence. Both were learning. The girl was learning that this woman was not temporary. That she would show up again. That she would listen without judgment. That she would not disappear when things felt heavy. The grandmother was learning how to be present without trying to make up for lost time. She resisted the urge to fill every moment. She understood now that love did not need to prove itself loudly. It only needed to be steady. They built their connection carefully. They found routines that felt safe. Walks. Shared meals. Sitting together with hands resting comfortably, speaking when they wanted to, resting when they did not. Laughter came slowly, but when it did, it felt real. The girl grew more confident with each visit. Her movements relaxed. Her questions deepened. She began to share more of herself. What she liked. What she feared. What made her feel strong. The grandmother received these truths with care. Meanwhile, the past did not stay quiet forever. The son began to notice changes he could not ignore. He saw the calm in his mother that had not been there before. He sensed the shift in her silence. When the truth finally reached him, it did not come as an accusation. It came true. He was forced to face what he had left behind. Not just a child, but years of avoidance. He saw that life had moved forward without his permission. That healing had begun in a space he had chosen not to enter. Regret found him differently than it had years before. It was no longer hidden behind certainty. It stood in front of him, clear and unavoidable. The grandmother did not scold him. She did not defend him either. She spoke simply, honestly. She told him that fear had shaped his choice, and love had carried the consequences. She told him that healing was possible, but it would require courage he had once lacked. Whether he would find that courage remained to be seen. The grandmother did not wait for his change in order to continue her own. She focused on the present. On the girl who sat across from her, signing with ease, expressing herself without apology. On the young person who had grown strong in a world that required patience and resilience. Watching her, the grandmother understood something with painful clarity. Disability had never been a tragedy. Fear had been. Fear of judgment. Fear of responsibility. Fear of being seen as less than capable. And yet, love had endured all of it. Love had waited through silence. I learned a new language. Accepted boundaries. Told the truth when it hurt. Stepped back when needed. Returned again and again without demanding a reward. One afternoon, as they sat together watching the day fade into evening, the girl signed something softly. You waited a long time. The grandmother smiled gently. Yes. Then she added, with calm certainty. I would wait again. The girl considered this, then leaned a little closer. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it carried years of meaning. The grandmother felt her chest fill with quiet gratitude. She reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The loss that once felt unbearable. The years of learning in silence. The patience that had shaped her into someone new. Love had not arrived when she wanted it to. It arrived when it was ready. And when it came, it did not rush. It stayed. With the grandmother and the granddaughter sitting together as evening settles around them, hands resting nearby, connected not by time or perfection, but by a love that waited, learned, and endured.